my aqua friends, welcome to my channel. Today we are going to do this really pretty sunset through the trees landscape down this country road. And I started off by soaking my paper in water actually for a good 5 minutes and leave it under the sink in water. I just filled up my sink and left the paper in there. So it's going to stay good and wet, and working wet on wet, I am putting in the colors of the sky that I see. I used horizon blue, quinacridone gold, and a little bit of quinacridone scarlet. After the sky, I am laying down the colors that I see in the landscape. The green is a really pretty light golden green in areas. So the color I chose to lay down first is the leaf green, and this is sap green that I'm laying down now. That is a little bit of raw umber. And right now I'm just blocking in the big colors that I'm seeing. Notice I'm not really working on any details. The road, I have used some sepia as well as Van Dyke brown. I am now starting in with some details using some darker sap green mixed with Van Dyke brown for the far bushes. It's still wet, and so laying down these little areas are going to soften. Some details on the road where the tire tracks are. I'm just starting to map those out now. The brush that I'm using here is a mop brush, and I like to use it for some different textural effects for bushes and shrubs and whatnot. The very bottom of these bushes, it's darker, so I'm using sap green with neutral tint. Okay, and that really does push that back in the background a lot more. Just with a little plastic piece that I have, I'm just etching in the fence that's along that back edge. So after letting it dry, I love vibrancy, so I'm re-wetting the bottom part of the painting, and I'm going over everything again with the same colors I'm using the first time around. So this is sap green, putting in those light rays that I see in the reference photo, and the very brilliant green that's down the middle of the road and off to the side. While it's still wet, I definitely need to go darker on the road, so I'm laying down more Van Dyke brown. Those darker lines from the shadows casted by the sun. This is a script liner brush I'm using now, and I'm trying to add in the details of some of these tire tracks for some visual interest. I like just enough detail for things to look very pretty and interesting, but I am not interested in doing a super detailed painting that would take me, 40 hours to do. That's just not my style. I like to call my style selective realism. I do like realistic painting. I'm a tight painter, but I will only go so far with the details. Just enough details to get the idea of the mood that I'm trying to set in the painting, and bringing forth the vibrancy that I always love. Even if my reference photo is on the duller side, I'll always ramp up the pigments. So this is where the light is coming through, and so I'm using my tried and true Daniel Smith transparent Pyrrole Orange. I freaking love this color, guys. It is just so bright and pretty. It is completely transparent and I just love it. I also have some burnt sienna in there. The colors of the tree branches changed dramatically in this painting because of this light shining through this area. So I'm also using ISO Yellow Deep. So I'm kind of working my way around that bright spot. I'm drawing in all the other tree stumps and starting with the branches. As you get farther away from the light, the darker the branches become. And I know right now it doesn't look good, and this is always the scary part of doing a painting, because there's always an ugly stage in watercolor. And even as I was starting on this, I was like, oh my god, this tree area is like a hot mess. It just doesn't really look like I have what's envisioned in my head. But I know that you have to stick with it, and you just have to get through that ugly stage and trust in yourself. Now, right here, what I did with just kind of spreading some of the yellow around, I think I ended up taking my piece of paper towel and smudging that off, because I wanted the leaves, all the foliage, to be a little more crisper. So I'm adding in the reflection of the sun there through the trees. See, and I ended up thinking, you know what, I want that a little more crisper. And you know, that's the thing, is I'm going to show you my mistakes and my mental processes as I paint. I'm not going to edit out every, you know, little different decision so that it looks like I just came up with this without any difficulties, because that never happens, right? In life, nothing is ever perfect, and there's always decisions and changing of plans that you have to do. So I didn't want to, because I'm left-handed, I turned it upside down to work on the foliage so that I'm not running my wrist through the wet parts. So that's why I'm working upside down here. Okay, so I'm trying to gently go from that golden area, and I used the, like I said, the ISO Yellow Deep, and then added in the sap green with the ISO Yellow Deep to get a very yellowy green. And the farther away we get from the sunlight, you can see I'm darkening things up the farther away. But it has to be done gradually, otherwise it's not going to look very realistic. I really love painting this watercolor landscape. I love this country road and just that luminous tree in the background. It was just such a pretty reference photo. as you can see, and you can definitely slow up the video, making the leaves that I do, I'm just kind of making very small movements with my hand, just kind of like, almost like hashtags, just very kind of loose. I want to say loose because it's still kind of tight and defined, but very small, detailed little hashtag marks that kind of make this really unique type of foliage. I love how this turned out. Because I'm making such small foliage lines with my watercolor brush, it does take longer than, you know, if I had a more loose nature and had bigger blobs, if you will. But I kind of like the effect. So here's another decision I made. Didn't really like the light, the way the light was coming through the trees. I didn't find it plausible the way it was. It just, there was something off about it and I didn't like it. So all I did was wet the area and sponged it out, and I'm gonna rework it. Right, much happier with the way that looks. And then there's this very burnt sienna kind of color brush that's under the tree, so I'm like painting that in there, adding in the darker hues, going back to the foliage and adding in the darkest leaves. If you guys are getting value out of this video and you like my channel, please think about subscribing and hitting the notification bell so that you don't miss my videos. I post longer videos every Tuesday, and I have a new series called Fast and Fun Fridays. So those come out every Friday and they take 15 minutes or less to paint, and they're a lot of fun. And so I went in and added more of my pyrrole orange for a little bit more vibrancy through the trees there. I'm also going back and darkening up my branches and tree trunk areas. It actually works really good turning your paper upside down to paint in all the branches. So I'm just turning it about so that I don't smear things with my hand. Things are starting to come together. It's kind of starting to look kind of nice. Those final details, it's amazing how much that makes a difference once I put the wooden posts in. At the end, like in the reference photo. Using my rubber brush, I am lifting. Now I could have used masking tape, but masking fluid I mean for this, but honestly these colors lift really well off of the paper, and I just find it a softer effect than masking, and it's just as easy doing it this way, and then dropping in the colors that the fence is. So it obviously takes a little bit of time, constantly, you know, re-wetting and using your tissue. Now, even though I used the plastic in the layer before, I kind of lost it when I made it darker, and it's not lifting very well, so I'm using an Xacto knife, and I'm just scraping in my fence line in the back there, and it works quite well. And on that side, there's also fence posts there, so I'm scraping that in. Now the fence posts aren't white like it is now. I will be going over those areas with the color that the fence actually is. All right, now I am lifting the fence line on the other side. So this is called lifting technique in watercolor. When you use a stiff kind of brush for this, it's flat as you can see, and you wet it, and don't use it sopping wet, but a damp brush, and you just rub it over the area you want to lift, and using a piece of tissue while it's still moist will take off even more paint. So as you can see, it's really coming together now that I have all those fence posts in, adding a little bit more details of the tire tracks on the road. This is a very dark sepia neutral tint that I'm using. Most of the brushes that I use are the Princeton the Black Silver series. They have a very soft snap to them. If you wonder what that means as far as snap of a brush, you could watch my tutorial I have on brushes, and I talk about all the ins and outs of brushes and how to figure out which ones are good for you. Alright, so the brown I'm using is Van Dyke Brown and Sepia, and finally getting the brown on those posts. On the left side of the painting, I actually added some burnt sienna to the fence posts, some of them, because that is the way the light is shining on those ones, and the wood looked a lot more warm on those posts. So darkening up where I need to, defining the posts a little bit more. Okay, so now I'm redoing the sun rays through the trees to make the rays a little more plausible. Didn't like the position of the last ones I did, so that's the fun thing about watercolor, is there's so many different techniques that you can fix things and change directions in your painting quite easily. So these are looking a lot nicer, straighter lines coming through between the trees. Looks a lot more plausible. So after I lift that, I am adding my ISO yellow to make the rays warm. So one thing I didn't like was that the shadows weren't matching up with the posts, so I fixed that up. And sign your painting and you're done. Thanks for watching, guys. See you next week.